Hey, welcome back, everybody. My name is Logan Arliss here at Illinois Aviation Academy with you for another Webinar Wednesday event. Thank you for joining us. Tonight's show, we're going to be speaking about ALPA, the Airline Pilots Association. We'll be diving into how they advocate and represent their pilot groups, the airline industry, as well as the aviation industry as a whole. We'll be speaking with none other than Mr. James Belton, the Master Executive Council spokesman at ALPA. He's also United States Air Force Commander and a 767 captain at United Airlines. So we'll be diving into ALPA tonight. If you guys have any additional questions that you would like to ask, please comment either on Facebook or YouTube, whichever stream you're watching from, and we will make sure to get to everyone's questions by the end of the show. Without further ado, bear with me as I bring Mr. James Belton onto the call. Hey, James.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, sir?
Great.
Hey, before we get it started, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us here at the Academy. There's been an ALPA buzz going around all day today as everyone's interested and excited for the show tonight and learning more about the Airline Pilots Association and what they do for their pilot groups as well as the aviation industry as a whole. So you are the Master Executive Council spokesman for ALPA. You're also a United States Air Force Commander and a 767 captain at United Airlines. So I'd like to ask you first, just how did you get involved in aviation and flying yourself?
Well, I was born in upstate New York, one of 7 children. For 3 brothers, 3 sisters. My father was a pilot in the Air Force and for Mohawk Airlines at the time. Merged with Allegheny Airlines, became U.S. Airways, and that's where he retired. When I was 16, I took flying lessons, and I attended the Florida Institute of Technology. Started in 1985, and I got a degree in aviation management, flight technology, and I got my CFII and about 1,000 hours of flight time all before I turned the age of 21. I started to fly charter after that for about 8 months, and then got hired by American Eagle. I flew a shorts. If anybody knows what a shorts is, shorts 360, shorts 330, ATR 42. I was a captain on a shorts and a captain on a Saab 340. Before I got hired with American Eagle, I had interviewed with the New York Air National Guard, and I was selected to go to pilot training, but had to wait a few years because of some staffing issues. So I took a leave of absence from American Eagle, and I went to Air Force pilot training at Reese Air Force Base, flew the T-37, T-38, and was mission qualified in the F-16 with a 174th Fighter Wing in Syracuse, New York. I went right after I got trained in the F-16, I got hired by United Airlines in February of 97. Flew a 727 as a co-pilot, as a new hire for a couple of years, transitioned to the 767 and then the 777. I flew in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq on 5 different occasions, 5 deployments, 70 combat stories. And in 2008, after coming back from Iraq, I was offered a full-time job with my Air National Guard unit as we transitioned to the Reaper, MQ-9 Reaper drone. And I finished out flying the F-16 during that time, transitioned and became a director of operations for our operational support squadron. I was the combat director of operations for a couple of years, and then selected to become our launch and recovery detachment commander. And I stood up the detachment for the launch and recovery for the MQ-9, which supports the schoolhouse in Syracuse for MQ-9 pilots. Did that for about 6 years, came back to United Airlines, flew the 777 for a little while, and then upgraded a year and a half ago, a little bit more than a year and a half ago, on the 767. So I've been a captain for that period of time.
Wow, big, lots of experience, both civilian. So you got charter experience, tons of airline experience, military, both manned and unmanned experience, loads of experience. We'd love to have you on to talk about some of your other areas of expertise, but tonight we're going to dive into ALPA. Now, ALPA is the largest pilot union in the world. They advocate for over 60,000 pilots, covering 35 airlines, both in the United States as well as Canada. and they were founded in 1931 in none other than our backyard here in Chicago. So I was wondering if you could give us a little bit, a little backstory about the history of ALPA and how and why it was founded.
Sure. Back in the 20s, there was this was the dawn of aviation, and there was a big problem with just aviation safety in general. And there were a few men. Dave Benke was one of them. A few key men who decided that these owners of these fledgling air carriers, air mail and passenger air carriers, who pushed their pilots beyond the limits of safety and often paid the ultimate price. These gentlemen needed to get together and form some kind of a labor union / safety organization that was going to make sure that the industry was going to respect the human life in the left and the right seat up in the cockpit, or however many seats that were up in the cockpit. So on, I think it was July 27th, 1931, ALPA was born, and the Airline Pilots Association has grown to represent about 60,000 pilots in a few countries, Canada and the United States. And there is an international branch of ALPA. And we are the largest non-governmental safety organization for aviation in the world. And ALPA has grown over time. There were a few instances where we picked up airlines, and then airlines left. I know that American Airlines back in 1963, they split off to Allied pilots. And but we are at probably one of our strongest points that we've ever been in. And it's truly an honor to work with such fine people at the Airline Pilots Association.
That's great. So you are the Master Executive Council spokesman. How did you first get involved in ALPA, and how does one become an ALPA spokesman for an airline?
Well, that's a little bit more luck than it is skill, I think. I have a face for radio, but nevertheless, when I was working for American Eagle back in 1991, I was just upgraded to captain, and I was 23 years old, just going on 24 years old, and the Gulf War had broken out, and it looked as though I was going to be stuck at a regional that was not what I truly wanted to do with my life. I wanted to fly for a major airline, and it looked like I was going to be stuck at American Eagle for quite some time. And whether or not I was going to move into American Airlines was not really something that was certain. So at that time, a position with Allied Pilots, the base representative for about 400 pilots for American Eagle, became available, and I ran for that office position. I was very young. My father gave me advice. He said, "Hey, you may not want to get involved in union activity this young and with a carrier that you may not end up with." But I thought to myself, if I'm going to have to spend a career here, I better make it as good as I can. I better work on behalf of myself and my fellow pilots to try to make that happen. So I served with the Allied Pilots for a few years as a base representative. I ran for president of Allied Pilots, and at that time, we were represented. Allied Pilots represented the American Airlines pilots as well as a couple of American Eagle carriers, and we were all one group, which was kind of a strange construct, if you will. And believe it or not, I didn't think that I would win that presidency back then, but the guy who did was very afraid that I was going to, because I had all the Eagle votes and the American votes were split up. Nevertheless, that was the beginning of my union activity, and I really enjoyed it. I felt as though those few years was like a master's degree or a PhD in labor activity. And I looked at my labor work as something that was very important, that I was going to continue going further in my career, because it's much more than just a negotiation for a contract. It's much more than just advocacy on behalf of your fellow pilot. And I will get into that and the things that we do in a minute. But as I continued along, I got hired with United Airlines, and I was sitting on a transoceanic flight with a guy by the name of Mark Seal, who was a Council 52 chairman in New York for the United Airlines pilots. And he was my captain. And we started talking a little bit of union stuff. And by the end of the conversation, he told me, "You know all about this stuff, and you're a relative new hire." And I said, "Oh yeah, I had experience with Allied pilots." So he invited me to do some work with the council. at that time, there was a publication called the New York Report. And the New York Report was being published by a friend of mine, Todd Insler. And Todd and I were roommates in college, met each other when we were 18 years old, and we've been best friends ever since. And really, I like to think that I inspired him to get into ALPA work in front of me. He may deny that, but I'll take that to my grave, thinking that that's what I did. Now, Todd is the master executive chairman for the United Airlines pilots right now, and he's the longest serving. And fast forward, he and I did some grievance work together, and with Council 52, and then Todd moved on to be the MEC's grievance vice chairman and then grievance chairman. While he did that, I bided my time to try to move into doing more union work. But mind you, I was a full up F-16 pilot with the New York Air National Guard. I had 3 children and a wife, and I had my plate was very full. So I did as much union work as I could. It was really a guilty pleasure for me, but I did some grievance work. I was on the grievance review committee, and at that time we were budgeted to be able to have a full-time contract hotline where guys could call into the hotline and we would answer the contract questions. And I served in that position for just under 2 years. That was right about when I took my leave of absence to go full-time in the military. After getting off of my full-time military, coming back to fly the 777, which was an absolute dream job. I was flying over to China and Japan and India and a few other places. And Todd called me up and he said, "Hey, I'm running for master chairman." And I said, "Good for you. I'm behind you 100%. And he goes, "Well, if I win, what job do you want?" And I said, I don't want any job. I already have 2 jobs. As a matter of fact, at that time, I had 4 jobs. I was working as a military contractor on the MQ-9 with a company called BGI, and we worked with L3 Corporation and built the simulator for that. And I was also the football coach for my son's football team with Bishop Grimes High School. So I had 4 W-2s that year, and he was asking me what job I wanted. And I said, "No, I don't really want a job." Well, he won the MEC position, and about every other month he would call me up and he'd say, "Hey, dude, you got to come here. You got to work. You want legislative? Do you want grievance? What do you want?" And I said, "No, I don't want anything." And I was enjoying my 3 trips a month on the 777, and starting his second term, he finally had it with me. And someone I forget who it was, did an interview with a local WGN, I think it was in Chicago, about, I think the subject was Emirates 777 that had a hard landing over in the Middle East somewhere, and they really didn't do a good job. So he called me up and said, "Hey, did you see that interview?" And I said, "Yeah, well, it wasn't all that great of a job." He goes, "Well, you are now the MEC spokesman." And he hung up, and I as I'm typing back his number in my phone to tell him some choice words, a text comes across. He says, "You're scheduled Monday morning for media training." And I thought, well, he's got me. And that's how I got that position. When I took the position, it's a policy manual position that I was put in, but I wanted to make sure that I was relevant and I understood all of the things I needed to speak on with the media. So I took a position on the communications committee. So there's a chairman and vice chairman, and I'm the 3rd member of the communications committee as a spokesman. And I do more than just speak. I write a lot, and we put together updates for our pilots, updates for the media, updates for the company, and whoever really needs it. I've done a little legislative work, and I serve on our national steering committee. And since I'm Todd's friend, he kind of expects me to be a jack of all trades. So he let it slip in front of our current president, who was the vice president at the time, Joe DePete, that I was a drone pilot, military Reaper pilot with a launch and recovery experience. And he said, "Oh, well, we could use you in our ASO, our Air Safety Organization, on the aircraft design committee for drones." So I've been doing that for this time, and I serve on 3 different committees. And what I used to think was my time off has left me, and I'm quite busy with all of those positions. So that's kind of how I got involved in ALPA. If anybody out there is young people that are interested in doing something a little bit more than just fly, which that is a rewarding career enough. But your union representation is extremely important. And the Airline Pilots Association has made this a very enjoyable experience for me. And I can advocate on behalf of the pilots that I serve with. And at any given time, for any given reason, I may be asked to speak to a news organization. I've done interviews with CBS and Fox News and CNN, and I was on Inside Edition recently. I'm not sure exactly why, but they asked about the 777 that was lost the cowling on the airplane. I did interviews on the 737 MAX, and just about anything that comes up. If Todd isn't going to speak himself, which he's a very busy individual, he'll make sure I'm well briefed, and we'll go through a process, and I'll be able to speak with the media. I speak with print media frequently, probably weekly, and sometimes several times a week. And then my spokesman position also has us creating podcasts for our pilots and the public. So I write and I host our podcast. If you're interested, the United MEC's Leading Edge Podcast is the name of our podcast. We have about 32 episodes. So I write and I host those. And that's been very rewarding. I've had a lot of fun doing that. We have 28 different committees inside the MEC at United Airlines. Not every airline has all 28 committees, but we have the 28, and it ranges from scheduling to grievance to HIMSS, which is a alcohol dependency program, to our Central Air Safety Committee. It's just a plethora of things that happen on behalf of the pilots, because their dues money sets up the structure, and then the ALPA volunteers show up to do the gritty work, and we bring that to each member. You can go your whole career and never be involved in anything that the union does, but you can't go more than about a day at work without benefiting from something that ALPA has done for you. And if you know anybody at an airline, I would ask them exactly what goes on with their union representation. Not everybody is always happy with it, but it's there. It's the reason why our jobs are as good as they are today.
Absolutely. Well, sounds like your buddy Todd knew you were the man for the job, and they're definitely lucky to have you as part of their team. The Leading Edge Podcast, that sounds awesome. That's something that I didn't know about, so I'm definitely going to look into that. I'm sure our guests will also look into that as well. Now, ALPA prides himself in building the safety and security within the aviation industry as a whole, as well as advocating and representing their pilot groups. So could you explain to us in what ways ALPA provides representation and legal defense for their pilot groups?
Sure. It's many faceted, if you will. On the local level, you have a representative, three representative, actually, a captain representative, first officer representative, and a treasurer of that local executive council. In the local executive council, you have members who mirror the committees that I just mentioned, and they sit on local committees. If for some reason you need some kind of a service, if it's a disciplinary thing, or if it's an aeromedical thing, or it's a professional standards issue, you will get a hold of your local executive. If you're a first officer, you call a first officer rep. You don't have to. You can use the captain rep as well. And you explain your issue. You say, hey, here's what happened. I think I might be in trouble with the chief pilot. Something went wrong on my last flight. And what they'll do is they'll act on your behalf using our contract. And the beauty of this is, years ago, prior to Dave Benke and the key men that he put in charge, you went up against that chief pilot and it was, hey, you did something wrong, you're fired. See ya. Not anymore. We have a process that doesn't allow for our pilots to be fired without cause. And often we're able to sit with our representatives and explain the situation. And we've gotten to the point where we've worked well enough with our management at United Airlines where we advocate on that pilot's behalf and we follow our contract. And we have enough things in that many 1,000-page contract that spells out the process for disciplining a pilot and really how to avoid going down that road. Everybody makes mistakes. And if it's not something that's wanton or on purpose, if you go out and you take drugs and you show up to work, you could expect that something is going to happen if you're caught doing that. Now, it was your choice, but are you a drug addict? Should you be fired? Well, we have a program. If the person says, yeah, I'm a drug addict, we can put you in a program. We can save your career. We can also get you off drugs. And that's what My Dues pays for. Same thing with alcohol. If you have an issue in your life that is, you're emotionally upset because you're going through a divorce. It used to be pilots were just told, hey, suck it up, come to work, do your job. We have a support outreach program at United, and we can get you in touch with a professional, and we can get counselors, because we know what it's like to go through this, trying to achieve this career. And some of the students at your academy are right on the beginning of that path. And when you get towards the end of that path, you realize just how rewarding this career is. This career is a cross between a rock star and a professional athlete, but you don't have to sign any autographs. It is truly that great. So we didn't want people making a mistake and losing that career, whatever the mistake might be. So if you're up against the company, that's one thing. And we have a whole stable of attorneys that we pay for as well. And those attorneys, they know labor law, they know industry law, and they're right there to file the lawsuit or file the grievance on behalf of the pilot. So when you pay your dues, and I think my dues were about $6,100, $6,200 this year, I look at that and a lot of pilots say that's a lot of money just to throw to the Airline Pilot Association. Well, I have a lawyer on retainer 24 hours a day. If I have some medical issue, which I did, I had cataracts when I was 36 years old. I had cataracts. Who would have thought, right? I had cataract surgery. I called Apple Air Medical was the first call I made after I found out that I had a suspected cataract. And they said, don't worry, we got a process for you. We're going to take care of you. So not only did I have an attorney, but I had a doctor. Who has a doctor and attorney in their pocket, right? Mm-hmm. And that was fantastic. So we have that protection on the local level. We have that protection on the MEC level with our attorneys and our staff. And then on the national level, we advocate for pilots through a couple of different organizations, namely the ALPA Political Action Committee. And we can't use dues money for that. So I give another sum of money, and most of I'd say a good number of our pilots give money so that we can access the federal government. And I know you have another question in here about what we did under the pandemic, and I'll save that for now. But there's a legislative effort that's very important.
Absolutely, yeah. It's got to be a leaving to the pilots to know that they have, someone that they can turn to at any minute and that has their back and will go to bat for them. Outside of legal defense or representation, ALPA also advocates for pilots regarding financials, which include compensation, retirement, and insurance benefits. How does ALPA achieve this?
Well, first and foremost, we have a negotiating committee and an MEC, and they set forth what our goals are to put those benefits in our contract. So I think that being a United Airlines pilot is a lucrative career. It's gone up and down over the years. There was a time after 9/11 and during the housing crunch of 2008, for anybody who's old enough to remember these things. And now COVID is a perfect example of that black swan event that may happen once or twice, or happened really 4 times in my 31 years as an airline pilot, if you include the Gulf War. But the ebb and flow of the economics of our world and our country affect the airlines probably first when we have something like that. So you look at that contract and you want it to be as ironclad as it can be, but you also have to understand the economics of the airline industry. So at one point I had a fund, what we called an A fund retirement. It was a defined benefit. And it said I was going to retire with X number of dollars. Well, we lost that in a bankruptcy. But we gained a whole bunch of money back in a B and a C fund, which are like a 401k that are contributed by our company. And then ALPA has a retirement and insurance. They have a national and they have a MEC committee that looks after this retirement insurance. This is their only job, is to try to make as much money and bring as much security as they can for pilots. The same thing with our insurance. We have not only life insurance, health insurance, but we have our loss of license or our long-term disability insurance. Every pilot knows that they have to take a medical, and you're only as good as your next medical. When I go and get my medical, which I just did last week, I come home and I tell my wife, we're going to eat for another 6 months because because that's how long that medical lasts for an airline captain. But more importantly, even nowadays, as you look at the airline salaries, right? And a 777 captain, 767 captain, you start making a very good living on an hourly basis. So when you go to negotiate a contract, are you going to up the number of dollars that you get paid per hour that may just go into the government's coffers because you're in a higher tax bracket? Or do you look at what we call the middle of our paycheck? So the top portion of our paycheck tells us how much we get paid. The bottom portion kind of explains some of the where it goes. And then that middle portion of the paycheck talks about your insurance and the things that you pay for in your insurance, the things that the company pays for in your insurance, and then some of the ALPA goodies that are in there, as well as contributions to your 401k. And if you're just going to make more money, you're going to pay more taxes. So how do you make more money come to you? Well, if you could take that money that you would normally want to make and siphon it off to your 401k, then you can keep that money and let it grow tax-free. And at the end of your career, you're going to have more. That's what our professionals do. They look for ways to make very creative ways to make that benefit you over a career. Say you lose your medical, your long-term disability is going to kick in and you're going to probably make somewhere in the neighborhood of 50, 55%, 60% of the salary you were making. That happens to you as a young person and you have to look for another career. It will help you bridge that gap. If it happens to me at my age, it'll help me reach the retirement age and remain in that level of comfort. And I won't have to necessarily go look for another career. So that's really what our retirement and insurance folks do, and that's what ALPA does for us. And I tell you, throughout my career, it has worked out. There's been times where I've been quite worried about what I'll have in my retirement, but I think barring the next disaster, whether it's the sun explodes or we have a meteor, I think I'm going to be all right when I turn 65.
Yeah, let's hope not. Let's hope that that sun doesn't go on us. That would be it. So yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So they definitely fight hard for the pilots and their financial security within the airline industry. Now, ALPA is also constantly fighting to improve safety and security in aviation as a whole. So what ways has ALPA improved the safety and security of the aviation industry?
Well, I don't think there's enough time, not only on this webinar, but really in the day or maybe in the week, for me to go into everything that ALPA has done to make aviation safer. But I'll talk about a few highlights. And very early on, it was our motto, and still is, a schedule of safety. Those guys back in the 20s and 30s that were being pushed to fly late night airmail, and there was no duty rig, there was no FARs were in their infancy. So you just said to the guy, hey, go out and work. And when you're done, you're done. But nobody did a fatigue study or anything like that. When ALPA, we saw the jet age come and we started looking at the complexity of aircraft. We started our ASO, or Air Safety Organization, and then the larger MECs have that Central Air Safety Committee. And we pioneered that ability to take a look at what was wrong, why were airplanes crashing. And we have an investigative arm. We have a critical response team that will help pilots out. If you ever watched the movie that depicts Chesley Sullenberger landing on the Hudson,
Yep.
you'll see that right after the accident, he climbs off the boat. He's still wet, and he's kind of whisked away by a couple of pilots. Well, those pilots were his union representation. They take him to a hotel room and make sure that he doesn't talk to reporters. He doesn't talk to anybody. They need to get the investigative end of this taken care of before anything happens. And that's what ALPA does. ALPA also, we helped with NASA. We helped pioneer the NASA report, or what we call an FSAP report. And it was really a wonderful invention at the time. We understood that mistakes were going to be made. And there's two ways, or actually several ways you can approach a mistake. You can cover it up and say, I never made it, and try to get by, or you could admit it openly and take the consequences. Maybe you'll get fired for it. Maybe you'll get violated by the FAA. Well, we made a deal with the FAA and said, hey, if we admit our mistakes and we fill out as much information on this, and it hasn't anything to do with drugs, and it's not on purpose, we didn't make this mistake on purpose, and we weren't doing something outright illegal, we'll tell you what the mistake was, and hopefully we'll be able to track those mistakes and improve our system. Which, if you look back, we haven't had a pilot-induced fatality in the aviation, in commercial aviation in the United States since I think about 2009. So we've flown over 100 million hours without having that crew-induced mistake, and that's incredible. We go year after year after year now without a fatality. That's something that other industries, the medical industry, has taken a look at us and said, "How do you guys do your CRM? What is this FSAP program? If you make a mistake, there's some immunity there," and that's important. Do you want your pilots to be punished? Well, punishment is one thing, but what does that do for you? We really want them to be retrained, and we want to make the system better, which we have. And ALPA has been right there all along. We have a huge air safety organization. We look at air quality in the cabin. We look at the design of the airplane. We look at the jump seats. We look at security. ALPA was a leading force, and United Airlines was the leader within ALPA for secondary barriers on the aircraft. I flew the 767 out of New York on 9/11. I know the pilots and the crews that were victims, the first victims of 9/11. I know that some of your folks in your flight school may be born after 9/11. But that was a horrific event. I was at home, just got home from Saudi Arabia that morning, and I hadn't gotten back to United. I wasn't going to fly for probably another few days, but I'd been flying Flight 175 that summer. And I went over to Saudi Arabia and flew an Operation Southern Watch. I arrived home on September 10th of 2001. And the next morning, I watched the United 767, one of only 20 767-200s that we had. So I know I'd flown that aircraft, slam into the South Tower at about 8:58 in the morning or what time it was. And shortly after that, I got a call from my ops officer at the squadron. He said, "How soon can you be here? You're going to fly a armed aircraft in a combat configuration, and we're going to shoot down any airplanes that are coming into New York or Washington." And I thought I was in a dream world. So in the aftermath of that, we had things like FFDOs, armed pilots in the cockpit. ALPA had to be involved with this. Our safety and security organization took a look at that, and they were integral in getting that program up and running. And pilots do that as volunteers. I was an FFDO for many years, and I did that as a volunteer, but I carried a weapon and I went to the training. Our secondary barriers, and then we started to get new airplanes that flew for very long distances, and we take a look at the risks of fatigue on our crew rest. So every time a crew rest facility is approved on a United Airlines flight, it was ALPA that went in and made sure that crew rest facility is adequate, so that the crew members can get a decent sleep during a 17-hour flight from, say, New York to Hong Kong or something along those lines. So ALPA, yeah, I really don't have enough time to tell you all of the things. There's so much in there. We have a safety seminar. Usually it's every summer, but with COVID, that has changed, and we're going to have it in October this year. It's usually in Washington, D.C. If you find yourself in Washington for that, this seminar is it's incredible. If you can find an ALPA member to take you in and show you around, they do incredible work.
Absolutely. That's definitely something we'll be looking into. Now, earlier you mentioned ALPA operating on a federal scale, and you saved this question about the pandemic. So ALPA played a large role in advocating for the airlines throughout the pandemic. In what ways were they able to assist the airlines during these troubling times?
Well, here we have this pandemic. It kind of came out of the blue. We knew that we had communicable diseases, and we had a history with SARS and with MERS and with others. I've taken some shots. We have to take the yellow fever shot if you're going to fly into portions of Africa. So we did have a background. We have a very robust air medical component in ALPA. But combine that with the fact that none of us thought we were going to be out of work for almost a year. And we went down to where we almost didn't operate any flights. We only had a trickling of flights. And even after 9/11, where we were grounded for a week or two, that was horrific at the time. This was so much more damaging than 9/11. So it was apparent very early on that we weren't going to see a return in aviation to where, and we still haven't, more than a year and a half into this thing. We're still at about 50-60% of what we were in 2019. So very early on, we took a look at how we were going to bring this back and how we were going to survive. Well, the airline industry is very important to our economy. And if the federal government was just going to let airlines go out of business, it was going to take a tremendous amount of time to get back in business. And even United Airlines, they were bleeding $25-30 million a day. They came to us and they said, we're just going to shut down for a few weeks. And we sat across the table from these folks, and they meant well. But our first question, and this was a question that Todd posed, I'm sitting there listening to him post. He said, if you shut down, how are you going to turn it back on? How are you going to get the crews to where? Are you going to put them on a Greyhound or rent a car? If there's not a crew in Denver to fly an airplane, how are you going to get a crew there? You're not going to dead end them then, because you don't have the crews and airplanes are up. You can't shut it all the way down. We said, okay, then how do we operate safely? What are we going to do? We have to make sure there's PPE on the airplane. You have to have masks. You have to have gloves. I voiced over the audio portion of a cockpit cleaning video, and it showed all the things we had to wipe down and what kind of alcohol wipes that we used to make sure that we were going to kill this awful virus that nobody knew anything about. And then as the summer went on, our legislative committee worked with Congress and said, look, you can't just let these airlines flounder. You have to come up with some kind of a grant and a loan program to keep them in business and keep them flying. Because if they don't fly, then goods and services and people aren't going to get around the country. And as much as we'd like to shut it all down and get well, we couldn't do that. We had to find a way to try to do it safely. ALPA had been involved in our ASO with studies on how safe it was for communicable diseases on airplanes. Believe it or not, the airflow through our HEPA filters, it makes an airplane actually very safe. And I would watch television programs and pundits say, oh, you're going to sit next to somebody in an airplane, you're going to get sick. One person's on an airplane, everybody's going to get it. That's not true. And we found that wasn't true. And we did studies and made sure that Congress knew about this. So if they were going to pour money into an airline industry, they were going to get their money's worth. So when it became apparent that CARES Act version 1 wasn't going to bring us to the finish line, our legislative folks talked with our Congress people, and they said, look, we're going to need a number 2. And then we got a number 3. And it looks like we're switching from a headwind to a tailwind, and we might come out of this thing. And we saved pilot jobs, particularly at United Airlines. We introduced a letter of agreement that modified our contract slightly. Now, the last time we went through this event back after 9/11, I lost my pension. I lost 43% of my pay. I've lost a bunch of benefits, and they didn't come back. They didn't come back for a lot of years. We just achieved bringing most of that back. And now this happens. We weren't ready to give all that up. We had a letter of agreement, and that letter of agreement stated that we were going to try to keep all of our pilots in the same seat they were in, even though there was going to be a trickle down and displacement, and we allowed about 900 early retirements. We wanted to be able to, when the pandemic subsided, bounce back and be stronger. And this letter of agreement, which was very contentious at the time, we agreed that pilots were going to take pay cuts, not pay cuts, should correct that. We were going to drop the number of hours that we flew in the months that weren't covered by the CARES Act money. Well, as it turns out, there was only 1 month. The month of November was the only month that we reduced our hours. And depending upon where you were on the seniority list, if you were a senior, it was only about 10 hours. And if you were junior, it was about 50% of your hours. The hours weren't there to fly. So a lot of guys stayed home and got paid for really doing nothing, which that was a great benefit, but they were ready and they were trained and they stayed in the seats that they were in. We had a lot of pilots show very unselfish actions, and they took early retirements. It wasn't the best plan, but they said, hey, look, you know what? If I leave, somebody on the other end can stay around. And we had about 900 pilots do that. And what we're finding out is with those retirements and the normally 65 retirements, we're in a position that when we come out of this, we're going to be short of pilots again, desperately short of pilots. But I think that's another one of your talking points. So we'll talk about that in a minute.
Awesome. So yeah, ALPA definitely played a huge role, as you mentioned, dealing with the pandemic. Now they're always looking ahead, looking in the future. And they just recently published a white paper called Battling the Pandemic, Rebuilding Our Economy and Connecting the World. And this sets forth a series of policy priorities which they believe are integral in rebuilding the air transport industry following this global health crisis. So could you speak on some of the policies that ALPA is fighting for in this paper?
White papers are great, and they set out that plan, right? That's your flight plan. And whether or not you can actually put some of this stuff into practice is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort, probably a lot of money. And a few of the things that we look at is, how do we get going again? How do we get the public to be confident to come back to fly? Well, a lot of people just want to go back to normal. I know I do. Year and a half almost in this pandemic, I think it sucks. And I look at young people. I have 2 kids in college, and my youngest son is a freshman up at the University of North Dakota. And what a horrific first year he's had. No football games, no fraternity parties, no interaction. And how do you even meet a girl, right? So we want to get back to normal. So how do we do that? Well, the domestic airline business, you can fly and have kind of one rule fits all. But when you start flying to other countries, you don't have one rule. You have ICAO, those are guidelines, but you have countries that say, hey, look, we don't want you to undo the good work we did with our COVID prevention by coming into our country A, B, or C, who you pick the country. If they think they did a good job, they don't want crews and passengers coming in. So they're going to have some way testing. And we've looked at testing right before you get on the airplane and make it, or a day before, or whatever it is. And you're good to go. Maybe you do, maybe you don't have the disease, but we checked it. And it looks like you don't have the disease, and that's a layer. And whenever you look at aviation safety, you have that, if you will, that Swiss cheese, if you're familiar with that, where you have a layer and another layer and another layer. They might have holes in them, but each layer tries to cover the next hole. And that's really what this white paper is talking about. There has been talk of a vaccine passport. The Biden administration says they really don't support that. I know there's a lot of pilots that say they don't support that. However, you may not support it, but if the country you want to fly into requires it, then that's what you're going to have to do. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of a time when we were flying into places like Accra in Lagos, Nigeria, and you had to take the yellow fever shot. And then we had some people said, "Hey, I'm not going to take a shot. I don't think it's right. I don't believe in the vaccines or whatever." We said, "Well, you can either take the shot here in America, or when you land in Lagos, they'll give you the shot. So you make up your mind. Where do you want that yellow fever shot? In America or in Lagos, Nigeria?" And some pilots could avoid flying to those places, but it's going to be harder and harder going forward. And really, like I said, that white paper is the flight plan, but we haven't checked the weather yet. We haven't looked at the logbook yet. There's so many things that still need to be done that this gives us some guidelines, but the weather may be the country of Japan or the UK saying, "Hey, everybody comes in here has to show that they've been vaccinated." And that's going to be tough. How do you do that? Especially when you have folks that don't want to take the vaccine or can't take the vaccine, right? Because some people can't take it for medical reasons. Some people won't for religious reasons. And then you look at a vaccine that has been approved, but it's been approved for emergency use, right? And yeah, want to take that vaccine, but you also, what if you have, I don't know if you've seen the news lately, what if you have one of these blood clots that takes your medical away? How do you deal with that? So yeah, there's a bunch of policies that ALPA is going to fight for. You can rest assured that we are going to try to make sure that each one of our members is protected as best they can.
Absolutely.
ALPA can do as much as it can within the airlines that it's in. United Airlines, I feel just extremely blessed that we've thought about some of these things ahead of time. And what United ALPA wants to do is, we feel like we've been very fortunate. We make a decent living and we have 28 committees, but an airline like Endeavor Airlines, a little bit smaller, doesn't have necessarily the support that we do. We want to reach out to them and say, "Hey, Endeavor, you don't have a XYZ committee? Come on up, we'll help you out." And that's our brand of unionism from United. That's the next phase. That's the phase that I know Captain Isler's interested in, all of his officers, and I'll be there to speak that role if I'm invited.
That's great. This next question's right up your alley, being a part of unmanned aircraft systems. So what is ALPA's stance on the unmanned aircraft in the transportation industry? The military's already demonstrated you could fly, large aircraft by satellite. What does ALPA think of this?
Well, ALPA embraces all technology, right? If you could fly that thing remotely, that's great. You want to demonstrate that technology. I've been firsthand in the infancy of that technology, and I can tell you right now, that technology is great, but it's not foolproof, and it's not ready for prime time. So I serve on the aircraft design committee, and I've done human in the loop testing at the FAA, and I've dealt with FAA rules committees. And I'm always amazed that when they look at, and I advocated on behalf of flying the Reaper in the National Airspace System. I also said this weapon system needs to be improved if you want to fly it over my house. I had a discussion with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force when I was going through the training, and I said, "Look, I understand your need for this on the battlefield. It's an awesome weapon. However, I don't really have a need for that over my house if it's not completely safe." So they had to make some improvements to make sure that they could fly in the National Airspace System. And during my active duty time, I advocated for that. So it was only natural that when I went into ALPA, that I would kind of take the other side. Now, I'm not trying to prevent drones and unmanned, whether you call it unmanned aerial vehicle or aerial system, remotely piloted. And really, that's what it is. It's not unmanned. It's flown. You have a remotely piloted system, and a pilot makes those decisions. However, the technology just isn't there. And when I see that gap in that technology, if you're flying a Reaper with some weapons on it, that's one concern. If you're flying a 250 passenger aircraft and there's nobody up front to make the decisions, the airplane will go lost link. It has to have a link to the ground, right? It's through a satellite, maybe geosynchronous, geostationary. There's sun flares. There's limitations to the system that has that airplane maybe fly with nobody at the controls. You can do a pre-programmed, but is it is it necessarily safe? So what our advocation was for was to make sure there were rules in place. It didn't have to be a whole lot of rules, but I don't want a drone company, whatever XYZ company, coming out and saying, hey, we're going to put all these drones into the air. And I've seen this at the seminars that I've been at. You have these companies saying, oh yeah, we can just fly these drones. And I said, wait, do you have a pilot's license? Oh yeah, we got 107's got a license. Well, do you have a medical? Do you have a sterile cockpit procedure? Or are you out in a field somewhere, or are you in an office building? Mm-hmm. Do you have drug testing? Because these are all the things I have to go through. So why should there be a safety or a competitive advantage for a company just because they have some fancy, drone looking thing? Right. At the end of the day, I'm willing to bet, and this is a tough one. I don't think in my lifetime I'll see unmanned aircraft at the airline. Not because it's not possible, just because it's cheaper to have me up front. Mm-hmm. It's cheaper to put a guy and a girl, two guys, two girls up front of that airplane with their necktie on and their cool sunglasses and operate the aircraft safely, as opposed to rely on the technology that we have. And I don't think that whenever you're going beyond visual line of sight, you're going to need some kind of a ground station. The next ground station, if you're going over the ocean, it's got to be a satellite. That costs a lot of money to put a satellite up there and dedicate the time.
Right. Absolutely. Appreciate your thoughts on that. Now, you mentioned some of this earlier with the early retirements that you saw throughout the pandemic, and we're already seeing articles on United starting to hire more and putting out that they're starting to hire more. What are your outlooks, and what's ALPA's outlook on pilot hiring for the future? And is ALPA active in the recruiting initiative?
Absolutely. And at United Airlines, it's more robust than ever. So the folks who are in your flight school, they know exactly, or should know, or will know exactly just how much time, money, and effort is spent in trying to get into this career. And if the career is not robust enough at the other end, then it's not worth getting in. And that's what we saw in what we call that lost decade, right? It was a time where there weren't a lot of people entering the profession because they were going to languish at a low-cost carrier or a low-pay carrier is what I like to call them. And it wasn't going to be worth, the lemon wasn't going to be worth the squeeze, right? Yep. You weren't going to make the money that you paid in time, money, and effort. You may as well go be an attorney or something like that. So we've gotten to a position where we put ourselves in this position that we were short of pilots, and that pilot shortage we stated a little bit by bringing the age from 60 to 65 in the retirement, but we have to pay the piper now. And if you look out at the number of pilots that are retiring in the next 20 years, it's quite incredible. And United Airlines plans to hire 10,000 pilots between now and 2030. That's only 9 years away. That's not a very long time. And 10,000 pilots we have 12,000 pilots right now. Pardon me. That's about 85% of our pilot force we have to hire in the next year. And that's if we don't grow at all. And we've already bought aircraft where we're going to grow. We expect in the next few years, we're going to bring our pilot ranks up to about 17,000 pilots. And quite possibly by the end of 2030, we may see 20,000 pilots on the United Airlines seniority list if all things go well and we're able to operate throughout the world. What the pandemic did was the pandemic put us in that cryogenic freeze for a year, but it killed airlines throughout the world. There are airlines in Africa and in Asia that will never come back, in South America. So we have the opportunity to go into those markets with the airplanes that we have and the airplanes that we've recently purchased and put as many pilots in our cockpits as we can. So here we are a year out. We're still at about 50 to 60% of the flying that we were doing in 2019. And we've already announced we're going to hire pilots. So we have several initiatives. We need to find these pilots right away. And we need to get pilots in the pipeline. And is United Airlines going to have a tough time finding pilots? No, not at all. we could go without the Aviate program. We can go out without any of those programs, and we're always going to get pilots out of the military or out of the flight schools, and they're going to come to us. But ALPA took a look at this, and we talked it over with our management. We said, look, if there's going to be an initiative from the flight schools all the way up, why don't we try to hire the best pilots that come out of those places? And our management thought about that, said, absolutely. Why don't we put some money into that? If somebody's going to be trained, why don't we put some money into training them and bringing them along, and then possibly mentoring them and coaching them? And I know that you have a question on that we'll segue right into. ALPA does a tremendous job with that mentoring and coaching, and I think that I'm doing this right now. This is why I'm here. I want to share what I've done with this career, and then make sure that folks at the beginning of the path can see that there is an end of the path. And one of the things that scared me when I was 21 years old, 22 years old, was I ever going to get to a major airline cockpit? And I looked around all of my my classmates and my friends in college, and I said, you know what? I don't care if they get there. I want to get there, right? Well, we're all there. I can't go to a major airline and not know somebody that I went to college with, or I knew early on in my American Eagle career. And whoever's starting a career nowadays, they got to stay with it, because it's going to pay off. It's going to pay off like it never has before. And like I said, barring the asteroid that comes down and wipes us all out, I think it's going to be a very robust future. And there's going to be a lot of hiring going on.
That's awesome. That's encouraging. That's great news for everybody listening. It puts us at ease a little bit. Now, how does ALPA, you mentioned this, we're going to lead into promote the pilot profession, mentor aspiring aviators like you're doing right now, and prepare future generations of pilots?
Parallel with our safety efforts, we also have many organizations that ALPA works with. Women in Aviation, Organization of Black Pilots. There's just a number of entities that we work with. We go to college campuses, and we go to events like Oshkosh and Sun and Fun, and we set up, and we have our education committee, and it's a national committee, and we have a MAC level committee. That education committee says, hey, how do we make sure that the folks that are coming into this business, how are they educated on the career? And when my dad became an airline pilot, he came out of the military, and somebody said, Dad, go over to Mohawk Airlines, they're hiring, you can go. He knew nothing about it. He had no idea what ALPA was. He had no idea what the ground school was like. He showed up, and they said, sit there and shut up and pull the gear up and down for some crusty old captain. And that's why every few months they would put an airplane in a very unsafe situation, and people wouldn't live. So we looked at that at ALPA over the years, and we said, we want to make sure that we're going to offer a cradle to grave education process. We want people to know how you get involved in aviation. When our management came to us and they named the Aviate program, we insisted we're going to be partners in this. So when someone gets hired out of one of the universities or one of the flight schools into the Aviate program, they don't sit there and just wait for the phone to ring after they built their hours. It's a mentoring, coaching process that goes along. If you have a problem, you fail a check ride, you have a medical issue, if you're with an ALPA carrier, you can take advantage of the ALPA. But if you're not with an ALPA, or the ones we're operating are with ALPA carriers, but you may be in a position before you get with that ALPA carrier, the United Express ones that I'm talking about, where you may need some mentoring, some coaching. Hey, how do I do this? How does this work? Can you tell me what to expect on my interview? And that's what we're doing. We're taking ALPA volunteers and saying, hey, you had a good career. Are you willing to give back to the young people and let them know how this works? Now, does that work for them? Absolutely. It's going to help people get into this profession. Does it work for us? Sure does. We get a better pilot out of this, right? They know the business. We get a better ALPA member. Not everybody believes, in unionism. Not everybody believes in what ALPA does for them. It's too bad because it serves us well. It gives us that voice. It provides the things that make our career better. But there are political movements and things that say, hey, we don't need that. There's individualism that says, I could barter my own deal with management. I say good luck with that, because that doesn't have a very good history. So if we can get our message of unionism and of professionalism out there to young people coming into this profession, they can be very comfortable with the dues money that they pay. Now, what is that all about? You hear about things in the past. The union has money and there was corruption, and the union doesn't have any money. The union has my money, right? I give it to them, and I'm comfortable with what I give it. I started this talk, and I talked about the lawyer that's in my pocket and the doctor that's in my pocket, and then 28 other committees that end up in my pocket because I give them a pittance. I give them $6,100. It's 1.85% of my salary I pay to the union. Well, I know that we fight over this amount all the time, and it sounds like it might be a lot, but I'm getting a good deal. And we used to pay a little bit more than that, and we actually reduced it. I'd be comfortable with paying more.
That's great stuff. Now, you have so much experience and knowledge in aviation, and you've done so much throughout your career thus far. So I've got to ask you, what do you enjoy most in the aviation industry?
The money and time off, right? There's so much that is enjoyable about this career. There's plenty that is frustrating about the career as well, but there's so much enjoyable about this career. Anybody who's ever had to wake up early and fly and see the sunrise outside the window of an airplane, or if you've flown at sunset, or you've flown over, now me personally, I've flown over the Alps, the Himalayas, the Andes, the Rockies, Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian, the Persian Gulf, and having seen, I've flown over the North Pole, I've flown over just about most of the globe. And when you look out the window and you can just say, yeah, this is what I do for a living, and somebody pays me for this, it is fantastic. But even more than that, it's the profession that I like being in. I like knowing that the person that's sitting next to me kind of went through the same thing that I did, and we have the same interests. And everybody on this webinar will tell you, whenever you get together with a group of pilots, that's all you talk about. And if there's someone outside of that group, they're going to look at you like you're crazy because you talked about airplanes for the past 3 hours. And that's really what I enjoy. I enjoy the industry. I enjoy what they put out there. I enjoy just the look of an airplane. Who doesn't look at a brand new 787 and say, God, that's a sexy machine, right? Who doesn't look like at an F-16 and just it's inspired by when you see that thing take off at an air show? And when you look at a Sopwith Camel or a Stearman and say, wow, what a pretty airplane, right? I'd love to be able to fly that. And once you're bitten by that bug, it never goes away. There's no vaccine for that bug. It's going to stay with you for life. And today we had a meeting, and I watched one of the first captains that I flew with at United Airlines. His name is Jeff Nuger, and he retires next week. And today was his last day in our MEC. He's been our system scheduling chairman for a very long time, and he's going to see his aviation career come to an end at age 65. And just the emotions that go through there. And I'm going to be there soon enough. And the people watching in your flight school, they're going to be there as well. So enjoy the ride. It's not a destination, it's a journey, and enjoy everything you do. And I've enjoyed every single job that I've had. I love flying the charter. I thought American Eagle was a fantastic place to be, even though I didn't want to end up there. Flying the fighter was great. I got really the fighter after 17 years, did a heck of a job on my body. So when I went into the Reaper, I said, no, it's not fighter flying, but you know what? It was a fantastic look at the future of aviation and some of the technology that I never thought I would be involved with. So if that sums up what I enjoy most, I hope it helps. If I haven't been as clear as a speaker, it's because I'm friends with the MEC chairman and he put me in this job. All right.
No, it's so true. Everything you said is so true. Now, finally, last question for the night. What advice would you give new pilots who want to get involved with ALPA, and how young can they start, or when can they start the process?
You can get involved with ALPA at any given time. All you got to do is introduce yourself to an ALPA member. One thing that pilots love to do is talk about themselves, and then they like to talk about aviation, right? There's an old adage for you tell a young lady, and even it could be a young man nowadays. When do you know that when the date is half over with a pilot is when he says, well, enough about me, let's talk about airplanes, right? So all you have to do is approach and be motivated enough to show up. That's half the battle, right? Showing up. There's a lot of cliches in this business too. So, but ALPA in some of our colleges have ALPA ACE clubs, and we've reached out to universities. I don't know that our education department has reached out to a smaller flight school like the one you have, but that's probably not a bad initiative. And maybe right now is the genesis of that. If we could have an ALPA ACE club at your flight school, maybe something that we want to take a look at. Yep. But if someone's interested in it, when you get on with an ALPA carrier, first thing you're going to do is you're going to be on probation. You can't really work for ALPA and during that probation year, but you can talk to your ALPA reps. And then as soon as you're off that probation year, you should have asked your rep, what can I do? And of those 28 committees that I talked about and the very robust national structure that we have, there's always something to do. You're interested in safety? We have a huge safety organization. You're interested in scheduling? We can do that. You're interested in counseling, mentoring, professional standards, past travel, insurance, retirement. There's everything out there and there's something for you. Get involved and you don't know where you're going to end up. I was a rep, my first job. We didn't have a very robust structure at Allied Pilots. So I had to do negotiating. I had to do counseling. I had to know what retirement and insurance and everything was all about, because we didn't have the committees to really support that. So that helped me out. But then I worked grievance. A grievance committee, a lot of people may not even know what that is. Your company doesn't want to always follow the contract that they signed with you. That's too bad, but maybe they misinterpret how exactly they should pay you or how many hours you should work. And they say, you need to do this. And we say, well, no, we didn't agree to that. Well, there's a process, a grievance process. I did that for a few years, and I never thought that I would be the spokesman. But I did have some public speaking experience in the military and among other places. And Todd, who is he's a great motivator, and he's got a talent for people and what they can do in organizations. And I've seen him pick people and put them in places, and they've really flourished. So get a hold of somebody, get a hold of a mentor, get a hold of somebody who's in the business, and then start that second career, if you will, in ALPA, because it's going to be rewarding. And you're helping your fellow pilot, but you're helping yourself as well. And that's important at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Great advice. James, it was thoroughly a pleasure to speak with you. Appreciate your time so much, your passion, your enthusiasm for what you do. And it was truly a pleasure. And also thank you for your service for our great nation. We appreciate everything that you do.
Well, I had a fantastic time being here. I hope it reached a lot of people, and I hope I answered a lot of questions that people had. I'd be more than willing to visit back with you. We're going to start our office work back out in Rosemont in the Chicago area in May. So if I do get an opportunity, get some time, maybe I'll come down to visit you and take a look. It was great that you reached out to us. There are a lot of folks like myself and ALPA that you can talk to, maybe get a different perspective. And I encourage you to do that. So thank you for the invite. I hope I supplied everything that you wanted to hear this evening.
Yes, sir. You were great. And we'd love to have you here. So when you're around, please stop by.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, James. James Belton, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show. We will see you all next time. Have a great rest of your week.